Thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar on connected learning for refugee higher education. As noted, my name is Jackie Strecker. I work with UNHCR to lead our connected learning portfolio, and we're really excited about today's webinar, which is a joint effort between UNHCR, Jigsaw Consult, and members of the Connected Learning in Crises Consortium, along with the Technology and Education in Crises Task Team at INEE. We think today's topic is particularly relevant given the growing scale of the global refugee crisis and the challenges that it presents with regards to access to quality education. As we know, only 1% of refugees have access to higher education, and this is compared to 36% of youth globally. So today we'll be discussing and looking at ways that technology and innovative pedagogies have been leveraged to ensure we increase access for refugees and displaced populations. This is one webinar in a long series of INEE Tech Task Team presentations, so do stay tuned to INEE's website and email lists for upcoming events. But I thought we'd get started today by hearing some findings from a research report that was conducted by David Hollow and his team at Jigsaw Consult. And this looked at a range of different programs in low resource environments and helps us start to think through ways that these programs have really been able to implement and impact refugee learners in the field. We also have the honor of having several program implementers with us, and they'll be sharing their views and experiences in terms of implementing these programs. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to David, who can unpack this report a bit further for us. David?
Thanks very much, Jackie, and thank you, Peter, as well. It's a real great pleasure to be with you all today. Looking forward to having the opportunity to talk through some of the research for you. As Jackie said, we've been recently finished a year-long study exploring the different approaches to higher education for refugees, with a particular focus on the role of technology within that. So what I'm going to do is take you through some slides. The purpose of all of those slides is to encourage you to engage with the research outputs, which I'll talk to you a little bit about as well. So I'll spend 15 minutes or so to set the scene and then pass over to the representatives from the programs in order to go a little deeper into the topic. So why higher education for refugees? We're all aware of the growing evidence base, and Jackie has already talked to us about the fact that only 1% of refugees have access to higher education, and in the context which we are most concerned with, that figure is much lower than that 1%. So the purpose of our research, a 12-month study with 3 overall objectives. Firstly, it was to map programs to understand what's happening, then to compare between the different approaches that are being used, and then thirdly, to learn lessons regarding what works in what different contexts and how that can be shared effectively for the benefit of all those who are operating in this space. And as has already been alluded to, within all of the research, there was a particular focus on the role of technology and innovative pedagogies in contributing to access and quality. So if I succeed today, then you will be inspired to read the research outputs from the study. One is a landscape review and the other is the research study. The landscape review was a mapping exercise of 43 different programs, all using technology in some way within their programs providing higher education for refugees. That was a desk-based study with lots of distance-based interviews. And then the second study, the research study, was the primary research conducted with interviews with over 300 students and lots of field work that I'll talk about in a minute. But feel free to look further into those if you're interested in anything that I cover today. As I said, we spoke to over 300 students and conducted over 100 interviews with program staff. Many of you on the webinar today, looking down the list, made great contributions to the study, and we're very, very grateful for all of the interactions that we had with you. So there's a bit of a spectrum of ways in which technology is being used within all the programs seeking to provide higher education for refugees. We're all familiar with this type of spectrum. On the left, we have MOOC-type environments providing a potentially widespread access to a large number of students for a low cost per user. And then on the right-hand side, the mainstream scholarship provision programs, things like DAFI, which we're all aware of. So DAFI provides an absolutely fantastic service to thousands of refugees, and it wasn't part of our study, so we didn't consider how programs like DAFI are making use of technology. We were focused in that middle space, blended learning programs, and how they are using technology. So here are the 8 countries where we worked. Again, many of the countries where you are operating, and you can see the programs that we interacted with in person there. Most are named and a few are anonymous at their request. We had the privilege of speaking with a huge number of organisations, including all those on the screen, and our research had a particular focus on Jesuit Worldwide Learning. That was for the research study, where a lot of our interactions with students came through JWL. The landscape review was an objective assessment of all 43 programs, as we said. So I'll leave Armando to talk more about JWL later on. So our research had 5 broad analytical themes. It's very difficult to present analysis verbally like this, and I would just push you towards the report and to just drop into whichever section of the report you are most interested in of these 5. So what I'm going to do is give a brief overview of some of the quotations and key learning that came out from that to hopefully whet your appetite. So access and participation. I think we're all aware, and the evidence reflects the reality that demand for higher education far outstrips supply amongst the refugee population, and the flexible study that is provided by many blended learning programs really does enhance the accessibility for refugee students. Many students explain to us how they can access blended learning programs, but they would never be able to access conventional programs. Some of the key learning that came out from there was the significant lack of access that refugees have to the conventional government-run programs. Although people are very enthusiastic about technology, courses which are marketed only online don't facilitate diverse applications. Another key theme, the importance of preparatory courses, bullet 4, to enable students to stay engaged in the program throughout their study. And lastly, the inevitable need for significant pastoral support and psychosocial support alongside the study has a significant impact in increasing student retention and engagement in the courses. Second theme, academia and organisational structure. There is a lot of diverse opinions about which are the most appropriate subjects to offer, and we'll come on to that. And also, many of the programs found that monitoring teaching quality, especially distance-based teaching, can be very difficult at the higher education level. Some of the things to draw out from that conversation, the grading is a constant challenge. All programs encountered difficulty with that. And then also many programs struggle with knowing which are the most appropriate subjects to offer. And in some situations, the choice of a subject is not necessarily based on a thorough needs assessment of demand, but on a range of other factors that are influencing it. The third analytical theme, and which may be an area of our conversation in more depth later on, is around the role of technology. Blended learning programs are inevitably dependent on basic technological infrastructure, but beyond that, the technology can create and facilitate global connections among students, enabling them to interact with people they would never have been able to before. It sounds a simple point, but there is a very high dependence on reliable connectivity, and inevitably in some of the environments in which these programs are operating, it's very difficult to have a consistent supply, and many of the students we spoke to just said how frustrating and challenging it was for them when the internet was not as reliable as they had hoped. But again, what technology does facilitate is a flexible working environment, and because students are able to set their agenda and schedule more effectively in blended learning, again, it becomes more possible to combine higher education alongside all of the significant competing demands upon students' time. A range of learning related to technology. The programs which use technology are broad and diverse, and what works in one context will not necessarily, or will very unlikely work in another context if applied directly. Programs need to make significant effort to help students transition into using an online learning environment. Time and again, we heard students and staff say that it had taken more time than expected to actually adapt effectively to being able to learn online using an LMS effectively. And that was the case for teachers involved in blended learning programs as well as students. The fourth theme around pedagogy, again, blended learning can facilitate global awareness and citizenship. And some of the programs that we'll hear from later are adopting particularly innovative pedagogical models in order to catalyze this kind of learning outcome through their programs. The development of critical thinking, again, was something that many students emphasized to us as we were speaking with them regarding their change of worldview and the way in which the higher education program was changing the way they looked at the world. There's a need for staff to have in-depth training on the specific pedagogical approach which is being used within the blended learning environment. That shouldn't be taken for granted. Unsurprisingly, students have a preference for participatory, learner-centered methods that actively develop their critical thinking skills. And as we all know, accreditation is incredibly significant for them and is a high priority. I've inserted, well, here you can see the quotations around the wider impact on students from engaging in higher education. And yet there is a range of different perceived values on that. In the second quote, you can see this issue which was regularly referred to around uncertainty and multiple possible futures, and the higher value of higher education being seen differently depending on what happened. The next slide is a graph which shows of those 300 direct student interviews that we conducted, there was actually quite a clear trend on the value of higher education depending on these multiple possible futures. You can see that students considered higher education to be of most value if they were resettled or moving to a third country, or also if they were able to return to country of origin. So a smaller group saying, yes, it's still very useful for me, just over half saying it's still very useful in my current location. But really, the most important benefit of higher education will be seen for an anticipated different future. So some of the learning around impact and future. The first point is particularly significant. Students feeling sometimes slightly let down or disappointed by not receiving reliable information about the way in which a program is accredited and their ability to continue studying if they move location, and how their accreditation will be useful for them in another country. Transparent application process is very important for helping students make informed decisions about whether the program in question is actually applicable for them. The second point, the right to work and recognition of online learning is a very significant factor and really has high bearing on the ability of students to stay motivated to complete their course. The final point on future and learning is around the non-academic outcomes. Although students were very keen to talk about the importance of accreditation, because it leads to future employment, employability is not the only reason why students study. Many students highlighted to us the way in which they have taken on proactive leadership roles within their community and have started to view the world in a fundamentally different way, and that those things are important motivators for refugees engaging in higher education alongside the inevitable need to enhance their future employability prospects. So to finish the presentation, we're going to consider 7 emerging lessons. These are things which are highlighted in the research and are applicable for programs wrestling with how they want to operate within this complex space. The first is that positive impact requires complex trade-offs. So I wanted to give a bit of an example of this. Down the left-hand side of that table, you can see a range of options, perfectly valid and reasonable options that a program may choose to take when structuring and designing the way in which it operates. International accreditation, focusing on a few students, locating where there are lots of potential students, designed in a bespoke way for refugees in a culturally contextualized manner with standard academic criteria and designed for the current context within which the refugees are living. They're all perfectly valid decisions. But the alternatives are equally valid. You could have an international program, or it could be nationally certified. The most appropriate option will vary according to the context. Alongside deep impact for a few, you could choose to sit at the opposite end of the spectrum and try and provide some lightweight impact for as many as possible. You can choose to locate where there are most students ready for higher education, or where the level of service provision is lowest, but there are also a smaller number of students ready for higher education. Students will argue passionately in both directions on this next one, whether the courses should be designed specifically for them or whether they should be integrated into the national system with no different context at all. Similarly, here, should a program be contextualized for refugee student, or should it be universally applicable? Again, students feel very passionately about this and in different directions. Should a program have special criteria or standard academic criteria? And then, should it be primarily focused on the future context, the desired future of the student, or the current context in which they're operating? Now, each of these, they're clearly a false dichotomy on every level. A program does not have to just do one or the other. But what we found in interacting with programs was that those who had thought clearly about their rationale for their decision were those most likely to be effective. And that's an opportunity for programs that are new to the sector to really learn from those who've been operating for many years about the implications of choosing to operate in one or the other way. So the second one, programs are inherently challenging, face multiple barriers. No one should engage in a blended learning program for refugee higher education thinking that there will be quick results. Alongside it being challenging, it is also very dependent on the operating context, and every program will work differently accordingly. Number 4, we've already mentioned. Higher education is absolutely valued because of employability, and that is of fundamental importance. However, students also recognise that once they have engaged in higher education, they're more able to have a positive impact on their community and engage in their own personal development. And that should not be sidelined in thinking through the outcomes of higher education. Number 5, inevitably, a blended learning program does depend on appropriate technology, and that should be incorporated within a sustainability strategy right from the outset. Number 6, lots of people talk to us about the importance of cost per beneficiary models, either as enthusiasts or as skeptics. Cost per beneficiary models need to be treated with a degree of caution. There are a range of factors which make it very complicated to do that type of modelling effectively, and the cost per student inevitably depends on the extent of the marginalisation of that student, and that has significant implications for outcomes and how we choose to measure whether a programme is effective. So be cautious regarding those models. And then the final point to emphasise, which I think is reflected in the uptake in the seminar, the webinar today, the sector is really expanding fast, and one of the highlights for us in having the privilege of doing the research was actually getting to interact with so many incredibly talented, committed people seeking to build partnerships across the sector. And that was very encouraging, and also it requires ongoing work to build systemic evidence and lesson sharing so that we can actually demonstrate to the wider community the impact of the work that's going on. So I wanted to draw things to a close there, and the final thing is to highlight a resource within the research. So if you look at the research study, at the end you'll see a framework of 40 quality indicators. It's not comprehensive, no framework ever is, but what we wanted to do was to try and synthesize some of the findings of the research into a framework which programs can use to review their own activities and to promote good practice. So hopefully that could be a useful resource for you to reflect on your own activities. I want to leave it there. The research was conducted by Jigsaw. We're a social enterprise in London, and we worked in partnership with Refugee Support Network, a London-based charity. I'd be very happy to talk more with any of you, and the contact details for myself and Catherine, who was the other research lead, are on the slide there. So I'll pass back to Peter and Jackie at this stage. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to contributing to the conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David, so much for a very comprehensive presentation. I think the research really provides a nice frame of looking at a wide landscape of work within this sector, and I appreciated the last point on really looking at opportunities for partnerships and collaborations and opportunities to learn from one another, and that's part of what we're doing here today, but also part of an initiative that is the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium. And this is a group of institutions that are committed to this work that came together starting as early as in 2014 and as a formal consortium in 2016 to really look at ways that we could collaborate, promote connected learning, and also to really learn from one another and learn together. So we've got a couple members of the Connected Learning Consortium that are with us today, and we thought it best to hand the floor over to them so that they can also tell us what resonates with them regarding the research findings, and also give you an inside look at what some of the practical applications of this research is, and what these programs actually look like on the ground. So I thought first we'd go to Dippo with the Borderless Higher Education for Refugee program, which really is a consortium in and of itself that brings together a number of partners to provide access to higher education in the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya. Don, can you tell us a little bit more about the BEHR program, and also if there are one or two findings that David presented that really resonate with the work that you've been leading there?
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone joining in on the webinar. And thank you for the opportunity to speak a bit about the BEHR project. As Jackie has mentioned, BEHR is a consortium of 4 universities: York University in Toronto, University of British Columbia in Vancouver, British Columbia, Moi University in Eldoret, Kenya, and Kenyatta University in Nairobi, Kenya. And we've worked with an on-the-ground NGO, Window International Kenya, with the support for the past several years of the UNHCR. And we're a project that's been funded by Global Affairs Canada to provide on-site and online higher education opportunities to people who are living in the Dadaab region of Kenya. Let me say a few things about Dadaab before we talk more about the program. Dadaab is located, it's a community located in the northeastern part of Kenya, in Garissa County, which is one of the poorest areas of Kenya. It's a semi-arid area that used to be home to a pastoralist community before the camps were built. The camps started in the 90s to host refugees that were fleeing the civil war and famine in Somalia. There are currently about 250,000 people living in the camps in the Dadaab region. 96% of those are Somalis. More than half of the students are of school age, and many of our students are people who have done all of their schooling inside the refugee camp. In the camps themselves, there are 35 primary schools and 7 secondary schools, and between, depending on the years and the grade level, but between 70 and 80% of people teaching in the schools in Dadaab are untrained high school graduates who work as incentive workers, who work as teachers. So one of the main reasons for our being there in Dadaab was at the invitation of Window Trust Kenya. Window Trust and other implementing partners in the region were interested in improving the quality of education in the camps, and one way that they sought to do that was to improve the quality of teacher education. So in our model, students apply into the BEHR program, and in the first 2 years of study, they are all working in teacher education programs. So we give priority in admissions to those people who are working as incentive teachers, not exclusively so, but this is our primary pool of people who were interested in inviting into the program. So in the first 2 years of the program, they undertake university credit courses. The courses that are offered by Kenyatta and York University lead to a diploma in primary teaching, and the courses that are offered by the University of British Columbia and Moi University lead to certification in secondary teaching. At the end of 2 years of study, you know, there are many students who for whom teacher certification is enough, but there are other students who are interested in continuing to study, and so inside the BEHR model, we've put together 4 separate degree possibilities for students to continue to study. We have a Bachelor of Science in Community Health Education and Health Promotion, a Bachelor of Education in Science. The Community Health Education is offered by Moore University. Bachelor of Education in Arts is offered by Kenyatta University. Bachelor of Education Science is offered by Kenyatta University. And a Bachelor's degree in Geography is offered by York University. Returning to the idea of BEHR being a consortium, as has been mentioned, I mean, some of the unique features of our project have to do with credit transfer, that the 4 universities involved all operate with an understanding that credits earned at one university will be directly transferable to programs offered by the other university. So a student who's graduating from York University in the spring with a degree in geography may have a transcript that shows that they've done 30 credits in teacher education at York University, 30 credits from the University of British Columbia, 30 credits from Moore University, and are completing their studies within another 30 credits from York University. So, you know, this is an important dimension of what it is that we do, to move back and forth between programs and to stack certificates, have certificate credits counted towards diplomas, and have diploma credits counted towards degrees. Another dimension that speaks somewhat to some of the things that David pointed to, we have a relatively open admissions process. We do only admit people who have graduated from high school, but many of our students are students who have not necessarily performed that well on the Kenyan National Examination and would be inadmissible to a Kenyan institution, but because we have 2 Canadian institutions involved in our project, we are able to admit people regardless of their KCSE scores if it looks like the person demonstrates potential that is not necessarily evident in their high school scores. Similarly, we are able to admit people who lack documentation. I mean, many of our students are students who can't get the documents that might make them admissible to a Kenyan institution, but because we have Canadian institutions involved, often an affidavit is sufficient. We are, I think, a good example of a stable, durable North-South collaboration. I mean, the 4 universities have been working together since 2010, and I'd be happy to speak about that sometime in the question period. I mean, it is not always easy, but I think that we found a way to respect each other's institutional autonomy in ways that enable each of us to operate in ways that have our own integrity and are in compliance with our own kind of local rules and regulations and governing structures and so on, but have found a way to find enough common ground to keep the consortium and the partnership kind of viable into the future. We also, in our program, admit 75% of our students are refugees, but 25% of our students are from the local community. We think this is important because you know, we're trying to create conditions that kind of facilitate good relations between the refugee community and the local host community. I think that the benefits of operating that way have paid off for us in the sense that the local community feels that that our program is their program and that their citizens are benefiting from our program in ways that if it was only geared towards refugees, they might not. With respect to the technological dimension of what we do, we call it facilitated online learning. Insofar as we at the beginning of our program, about 80% of our courses are taught face-to-face. All of them are supported by a Moodle platform, so that our students become accustomed to working with a learning platform. But over time, our students move from 80% face-to-face. In the 4th year of their study, most of their courses are 100% online. But the fact that they're online doesn't mean that they're studying individually, by themselves alone. We very much work on building a culture of collaboration in our program. Students study in groups. They learn from each other. They support each other in their learning. They provide mutual support. They make use of technologies in addition to the ones that we provide. So, our students organize WhatsApp groups in order to continue to facilitate discussion that occurs outside of the Moodle platform and so on. And we also have staff on the ground, Windows staff who provide a measure of academic and technological support that we find we can't imagine doing what we do without that on-the-ground support. To date, we've had 125 students earn the one-year certificate of completion in education studies. 36% of those were women students. We've had 50 students complete a diploma in teacher education primary from Kenyatta University. 25% of them have been female. 80 students have completed the diploma in teacher education secondary. Unfortunately, we only have 6% of those students have been female, and that has to do with a lot with the high KCSE scores that were required on admission to that program. We will have this spring 83 students who will be graduating from 4 different bachelor's degree programs. 15% of those graduates will be female. And we've got another 90 students who will continue to study for degrees, and of those 20% are female. The last thing that I would say, just is in addition to the bullet points that were in David's presentation about why higher education for refugees, we've always said as universities, our mission is about the creation and critique of knowledge. We think that in small ways, as our students participate in classes with students both at York University and in Kenya, that in their all-class discussion forums, in their joint assignments, they are participating in the creation of new knowledge, not just about forced migration, but new knowledge or knowledge generation across a range of social, environmental, economic issues. I also think that we're quite deliberate in our efforts to see our work as contributing to creating for conditions for peace in the region. I think that higher education has a role to play. It isn't just in post-conflict. I think that higher education can be an important contributing factor to the creation of conditions for peace, and we see our work very much in line with that goal. We share the dream of our students that one day we will have coffee in Mogadishu, and that's what we're working towards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Don. And I'm sure there are many questions emerging from the participants on this webinar. I'll ask you just to hold those questions for now, and we'll talk through 2 other programs. But please do feel free to write them into the chat so that you don't forget, and maybe prompt Don in thinking through his responses. But thank you very much, Don. And I think there is a great example of bringing together universities both at the national level within Kenya and universities from Canada, really to look at opportunities to enhance not only access, but really the quality of higher education that's on offer. I'd like to hand it over now to Peter Balleis with Jesuit Worldwide Learning, which is another collaborative global partnership organization that has been able to implement higher education programs in a number of different groups. And I wonder, Peter, if you can tell us a bit about the approach that Jesuit Worldwide Learning has had, not just in your initial pilot sites in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya and the Salika camp in Malawi, but also as you've scaled JWL's locations. So what's your experience been, and what's really the approach that you've had to, I think, the phrase that Don used about creating conditions for peace and access to higher education would probably resonate really well with your mission. So Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie. Actually, in the run-up to this webinar, we decided that Armando is giving that short presentation. Armando, are you ready to come in here? And if there's something missing, I'll fill in. I'm happy to do so.
Great.
Good.
Sorry, Armando, over to you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. A little bit faint, so if you can speak into your mic a bit more, but please go ahead.
Certainly. So good morning or good afternoon to you all. JWL welcomes the opportunity to participate in this webinar. Thank you to you, Jackie, and to INEE for making this possible. David has already introduced the landscape for higher education programs in low-resource environments, including illustrating a thorough review of the academic characteristics of several programs. And what I actually wanted to do during this presentation was to focus on the non-academic impact, or in the case of some of the references and the findings of the study that relate to JWL higher education programs. And to do so, the Jigsaw study used learning outcome stars, which is basically a form of self-assessment to measure non-academic changes that students experience as a result of pursuing a program of study in higher education. So what I like to do is to make reference to two domains that were identified for this aim. The first one being the social and emotional, and the second one being learning approaches and cognition, which in many ways align quite closely with the aims of Ignatian pedagogy that are characteristic of Jesuit Worldwide Learning programs. So let me go into a little bit of detail in terms of the first domain, which is the social and emotional, which includes basically goals around community values, civic values, mental health, and well-being. In addition to
Armando?
Yes?
Armando, if I may, yeah, if you could, it's a bit faint, if you could just speak a little closer to the mic or a little louder, that would be very helpful.
Okay, great.
Much better, much better. Yes, much better.
Excellent. Fantastic. So in terms of the learning approaches and cognition domain, that this will include, and I will make some brief references to this, persistence and attention, cooperation, problem solving, as well as critical thinking. So let me dip in terms of the findings. So concerning the first domain, which is learning approaches and cognition, this is an area, a non-academic area, identified by JWL students, and namely the major characteristic was critical decision making. And just to perhaps provide a definition, characterized or described as analyzing information and different opinions in order to make a choice. An indicative quote mentioned, noted by one of our students in Kenya, suggested that before he joined the course, he had to consult others to make decisions. Quoting him, "I used to fear taking risks and used to focus on the negative sides of potential outcomes. But after the course, I have learned how to analyze the positive and negative elements, and it has taught me how to better analyze and address risk." Jesuit education for JWL as a whole has been described as a call to critical thinking, a call to develop the whole person, head and heart, intellect and feelings, moving the learning experience beyond raw knowledge to the development of the more complex learning skills of understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And all of these elements, in the case of JWL, become ever more relevant in the delivery of our teaching as well as learning activities, such as the discussion groups, the debates, and the reflective diaries that, according to the Jigsaw study, were particularly appreciated by students. What is interesting also, or an interesting finding of the study as it related to JWL, was that several learners explicitly contrasted their prior experience of education, the more traditional learning methods, to this different approach of education. And one JWL student in Myanmar specifically noted that this, she realized that after a year, it really opened her thinking. Another important aspect, which is non-academic, but quite indicative of the contribution of higher education among refugees, is collaboration, which basically allows the students to foster a sense for working together with other people. And this was another significant change that was identified by students. Some of the specific indicators were around building trust and breaking down the stereotypes. And I'd like to note something that was mentioned by a diploma student in Malawi, whom he said, "I could not express myself with other people, but now I am open to discuss with others." Similarly, in Kakuma, a 23-year-old man mentioned that when he looked back at the diploma course, women were looked as subordinates, not people who could also make good decisions. But now learning this course, after getting this diploma, I had come to realize that these were only myths. Among other indicators that were significant, again, non-academic indicators, were creativity and persistence. Let me touch briefly on some of the social and emotional factors that are quite central to the ethos of Jesuit education and that are especially relevant for Jesuit Worldwide Learning. One important aspect is social awareness. And social awareness meaning how much students, learners, think about their needs, but also the needs of others and their community. And this was de facto the most important significant change indicator in the lives of the students. And many sub-themes within this category, including changes in their perspectives towards other cultures and religions, and the reduction in stereotypes. A student in Saleka said, for example, the course has really changed me the most in my prejudice against other cultures. I have learned that we are all one and all the same because I have got to know people from other cultures with different views. Another student noted, I did not know I could learn with people from different cultures and backgrounds because we formerly considered some of these people our enemies. But this course has taught me to take people as individuals and not generalize. Members of host communities enroll on courses alongside refugees also increase awareness of the situation of refugees. One reason for changes in social awareness as articulated by JWL students is the way in which courses have brought them together with members of other cultures through online discussion boards. More specifically, a student in Malawi noted that you can see that there are others in the same situation as you are, and you are not alone. The integrated community-focused elements, specifically of our JWL diploma program, which, by the way, is a diploma that is accredited by Regis University in the United States, happens through student participation in community projects, research in the community, and community placements. And these were also noted by students during the research that took place. And many of these activities actually happen outside of the required regular coursework. And this increased awareness has led to a multitude of different actions for the benefit of others, ranging from volunteering in or setting up community activities and returning as volunteers, assistants within the JWL diploma program. So basically becoming or allowing to have a multiplying effect among other newer students that join the program. I'd like to make two final remarks, one concerning leadership, which is another important characteristic of the JWL approach, and just to highlight how important it is, leadership as an important aim of Jesuit education to form leaders in service. Jesuit motto is men and women of competence, conscience, and compassionate commitment for others. And let me cite one student, one female student, who said, "When I joined the diploma, I did not know how to manage myself on my own, how to give ideas to my people when they asked me for experience. But through this diploma, through reading many texts, assistant resources about leadership, about our professors, how presidents are, I have learned that I'm able to make my own decisions, to give a decision or assist anybody who comes for assistance." This was a JWL student in Kenya. Having a more positive view of self and others was the third most frequent selected area of most significant change. This links to the Jesuit focus on individual care and concern for each person, and encouraging a realistic knowledge, love, and an acceptance of self. So these are just a few highlights that actually came up from the research and showcase some non-academic features that also highlight how important higher education is as a resource for change, creating a culture of peace and change in perhaps the most vulnerable communities, that is the refugee camps and many other places where we find listening, and I will be ready to address any questions at the end of the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Armando. Again, I think lovely to hear from the students themselves and really understand and unpack how these programs really make a difference both to the individuals and the communities. I know we're coming close to the end of the time, but I wanted to hand it over to Kepler, and then we'll continue the discussion in the Q&A session. So if you do have extra time, please stay with us. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ashley to tell us about another model, Kepler, which is operating in Rwanda. Ashley?
Okay, thank you, Jackie. I will try to be brief so that we can have some time for questions. So just as an overview, Kepler is a university program that is based in Rwanda, and we offer U.S. accredited bachelor's degrees through a partnership with Southern New Hampshire University in the United States. And we really focus on giving access to higher education for students who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend. We're a blended learning model. So students complete College for America's online competency-based degree from Southern New Hampshire University, and then they also take in-person classes with local course facilitators who are on the ground with students. We opened in 2013 in Kigali, and we were really opening to serve a vulnerable Rwandan population. But in 2013, we expanded into the humanitarian space. So we opened a satellite campus in Kiziba Refugee Camp, which is in western Rwanda. It's home to about 18,000 Congolese refugees, and it's been there for about 20 years. So most of our students have spent the majority of their life in the camp. We also in 2015 began accepting refugee learners onto our campus in Kigali. Currently, we serve about 500 students, of which about 110 are refugee learners, and we're looking to expand that number. We'll have our first BA graduates who are refugees this year. We have about 80 Rwandan graduates currently. One other, I think, important part of the Kepler mission and model is our commitment to college to career pathways. And so employment outcomes are really a large focus for us. We are lucky that in Rwanda, refugees have full freedom of movement and full right to work. So currently, among our Rwandan graduates, we have a 90% employment rate, and we're hoping to keep that number with our refugee graduates. So there's my intro. I would say lots to respond to in terms of the research. I think one point that particularly resonated with me was this idea of the need for financial and psychosocial support. I think that a lot of times when we look at blended learning programs, there can be this idea that we just give students a laptop and then, you know, and some internet connection, and then you get success. And I think what we've found is that when you're trying to reach some of the most vulnerable populations and really making sure, you know, we have a 50-50 gender balance, and we found that in order for our students to be successful, that we need to offer all of the wraparound services. So in Kaziba, we actually have a full campus where we have counseling services, we offer lunch, we have work study, we have health services. And we found that those are just such an integral part of academic success for our students. And so when I think there's a challenge there when we talk about cost per student, and you know what David was saying about how do we quantify that, especially when you're looking at issues of equity. So I think that was one particularly resonant point for me. I know I spoke pretty quickly there, but I want to make sure there's some time for questions, so I'll pass it back to you, Jackie.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ashley, and to all of our presenters. I'm sure there's questions emerging. I don't yet see anything in the chat, but please do feel free to write a question if you have one, or you can raise your hand by highlighting the hand gesture, as you can see on the screen there, and we can pass the mic to you. But maybe as we have the first hands come up and the first questions emerging onto the chat, if I can ask you, Ashley, just to unpack what a competency-based degree program is.
Sure. So a competency-based degree program is, I think, different from a traditional program in that students are assessed on a specific set of competencies or skills, and all of the learning is self-paced. So they have a set of projects that they complete online that are, each project is associated with a certain number of competencies, and they have to demonstrate through that project that they've mastered all of the competencies in order to move forward. So students maybe will complete a project and turn it in, and then if they haven't mastered a specific skill, they'll get some feedback on that skill and maybe some resources, so they can apply the feedback, look through the resources until that skill has been mastered. What we really like about the competency-based model, especially in the refugee humanitarian setting, is that it's totally self-paced. So we have students who are employed full-time and will probably take quite a bit longer in their degree. And then we have other students who you know, can complete a full bachelor's degree in 3 years. So that's an exciting part of the competency-based.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley. And we do have a couple questions emerging. One first on the BEHR program. There was a question to you, Dawn, on what other selection criteria are you looking or are you using for your admissions other than the exam scores, or in fact in lieu of the exam scores?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We really, we tried to, as I said at the outset, our priority was to recruit those high school graduates who were working as incentive teachers in both the primary schools and the secondary schools. We had openings. I mean, in our first cohort of students, we admitted close to 220 students, and I would say that was almost all of the available students there. I mean, we admitted people who had graduated from high school. We sent community mobilizers out, you know, into communities to talk about the program. it wasn't, I mean, it may be a surprise, but in retrospect, but I mean, we had to do a lot of convincing that we were kind of serious and that this program was actually going to appear. I think that people were quite suspicious and skeptical. They'd seen a lot of universities come and go into DAB and make promises and not deliver on them. So that when we, when we really did go out and try to recruit, it really was a lot of recruitment effort. It wasn't as if we had difficult time selecting the students. I mean, we worked hard to get the 120 students that we got. Often it took convincing, one-on-one meetings with people who said, oh, well, this isn't for me. I went to school in Somalia and it's been a long time. I mean, to convince people that actually this was a program that was available to them. We worked hard at recruiting from minority groups in the camps. The camps are overwhelmingly Somali. So I think that we worked really hard to get students from DRC and Rwanda and Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and so on to come forward and participate in classes where they felt that they might be excluded, to convince people that we were actually interested in recruiting them. Same with persons who had, disabilities. I mean, people that had hearing, vision problems, mobility problems. So, like I said, we admitted more people than we expected to be able to complete the first year of the program, but we did it on the basis of kind of an open access approach, which said that if we admit them into the program and if they do well, they can continue to study as long as they keep performing well, which is why, we admitted people without documentation and people with low KCSE.
Excellent. Thank you, Don. Another question specifically to Ashley that's emerged on the chat is regarding language training that's needed for students to be able to access the program. So a question around if English components have been added to the curriculum in Kepler. Ashley?
Yeah, thank you. So we've always had English components, but I think that we have found that in Kiziba, language has been a larger issue than it was in Kigali. We've done a couple things. So one, we've expanded our preparation program, so trying to better prepare students, specifically women, by building their English skills before they even apply to Kepler. And that's a model where we actually have our current students teaching those courses as part of work study. So that's been helpful. Another big change in Kiziba is we started doing more small group English skill-based instruction. So kind of outside of their online work or their bigger classes, where we pull groups anywhere from 5 to 10 students who work with a course facilitator on a really specific English skill. We've also started doing more discussion groups, again, specifically with women. We find that in general, the women's oral language skills are often lagging behind. So we've tried to add some new elements to the curriculum to better address those concerns. But it's definitely always a challenge, and we're always looking for kind of new and innovative ways. I think most educators know that language development is oftentimes just takes time, and in a higher ed program, you don't always have that time. So for us, it's really trying to figure out ways to leverage the time we do have as best we can.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ashley. And Armando, would you like to reflect a little bit on JWL and any language challenges that you've seen as you've been operating in so many different contexts?
Maybe Armando doesn't come in, so I can come in on that. I mean, as the Jigsaw report says, the higher education providers need to look into the language provision to prepare people. So we have learned over the years that we have moved now to a standardized language course following the CRF, using the Cambridge language curriculum with even international testing, which in itself is a value for many who might not go to the academic studies, but it is to build up the base of training sufficient people in a good English, which is already, increasing the employability, and from there then to take people into the higher education program or any professional training. So English is important, and it's also important in our viewpoint actually to create even in the English language students a certain kind of a global mindset. They have a tool of communicating with people they think they might have never been able to communicate. So, and that's, we've de facto with this year we roll out our English program in a new way, using little tablets, beginning to into that people have the gadget themselves, using also technology to advance the quality. And that is also an aspect I might add to one of the main topics of the Jigsaw report, was the technology. It's already 8 years now since we started in 2010. Of course, we have learned a lot. And with one of the testing programs in Damis camp in North Iraq, where we said we didn't have the space, we had a small space, and we didn't have all the support structure. So we moved there, and that's the model now we want to implement ever more. The refugees organize themselves. We equip them with tablets. They build their study groups, their support groups, and so on. But everyone has a tablet. We cut down on the long ways, like in Kakuma, where people have to come to the center. The center is only open from 8 to 5 o'clock. So technology allows us now to study, that they have more, to study at the time which is convenient to them, and actually also with the professional courses, so which is an application we have developed with a partner organization, that people can study offline and online. And when they're online, they'll upload their stuff and download. So to use technology better, to make it more flexible, and it's actually a protection issue. Obviously in Kakuma camp or in some places where the girls have to walk very far and so on, there's harassment. And so that's a way, or in Amman, to say, okay, people have long distances, they cannot pay the bus, they always to come to the center. Let's equip them with that. And actually, in terms of financial, it's even more economic than setting up centers, maintaining centers and all the infrastructure with computer labs and so on. So we need to see also, not to say the Jigsaw report is 2 years old now, or 1 year, but there's progress, and we have learned a lot and implemented already from that report to move on, and say, okay, we have learned that, we need to adjust that, and we move on. It's very, very helpful. We are grateful for that. So that's where we are in all the programs, that technology changes actually make a major push, even shaping our program so that it becomes ever more student-based. Because I realized in one place like Amman, the students were not supported, but they organized themselves. As Bea said, they put up their own WhatsApp groups and so on, or in Myanmar, they live in different places. Obviously, they're in the same place, they go to the same center. No, they're in Yangon, in Taoji, and they support one another. So that's actually what I learned. The students show us ever more what model to go. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. We'll take a couple more questions that have emerged. We will finish at 12:30, but I just wanted to say that if you do want to learn more about some of the promising practices or contextualized practices, please visit the connectedlearningforrefugees.org. This is the consortium website, and on here, the consortium has actually developed quality guidelines similar to the work that's emerged from Jigsaw and really informed by this research and looking across these different programs. And one of the things that will be published at the end of the month is our playbook, which is meant to give some very specific case studies to each of the guidelines on how these programs have incorporated the helpful suggestions from the research from Jigsaw and from others, and how that's actually come into practice. So for those individuals and participants that have to sign off, thank you very much for joining, and to our presenters. And for those that are still able to stay with us, we've got one additional question here to David, which is asking about whether the research, or through the research process, if you came across college-based programs or programs that were technical or vocationally oriented. David?
Sure, thanks Jackie, and thanks Tom for the question. Sure, the brief answer is that most of the programs that we visited weren't primarily focused on vocational and technical training. The exception would be EDRAC in Jordan, which offers a variety of vocational courses on employability, STEM, business and entrepreneurship, and teacher training. So EDRAC very specifically through the MOOC, but the majority of programs, I think JWL included, would see themselves as primarily academic qualifications, but providing a range of vocational courses and qualifications around the side. So trying to break down the distinction between what is just clearly formal higher education and clearly vocational, trying to again provide a blend between the two. So that would be the quick response.
Great, thank you for that. Another question coming up that's asking about the social emotional needs of refugee students and how these are being incorporated into the curriculum. Ashley, could I ask you to pick that up first?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Kepler, and then I think I would also love to hear from JWL, because I think we're currently trying to learn more from them. They've been in the space a lot longer. I can tell you, so Kepler, we do have a full-time counselor, and so our counselor does a lot of one-on-one sessions with students, but then she also offers monthly workshops, and a lot of times those topics come up based on student needs. So it's everything from stress management to she's done some workshops around cultural integration and around kind of the stress that students have about going out of the camp for internships, and so how they deal with kind of concerns about stereotypes around being a refugee, or just concerns about being outside of the camp more generally. I think that JWL has been able to develop a more robust curriculum that's actually part of the classes. That's something that we're now in our second year in the refugee space, and it's something that we're looking into, where we would love to have in the classes that we offer every day, to find a way to integrate more socio-emotional supports into that curriculum. But we're not quite there yet, to be honest.
Great, thank you, Ashley. And Peter or Armando, any thoughts?
Yeah, let me come in on this. I'm not sure if we are so good. What I know is that when we work with our partners in the main camps like Kakuma Seleke, that's the JRS, and they definitely have this, also the more explicit, psychosocial accompaniment. And what I know from experiences, and we can see the academic results, if we have a good coordinator who takes care of the students, follows up, knows why don't you come, are you sick or what is it? And that kind of accompaniment by the coordinator on the ground is definitely very important to deal with all these issues. Is it now very kind of professionally focused, as you said, I cannot always say that this is the case, but that personal dimension is definitely important, and it shows in the retention rate of students. Something also very important what we get to learn over the years, you see, JRS, our partner organization, has then employed some of the graduates who have done this diploma in Regis in liberal arts. Some are now support staff or also coordinators and supporting on a day-to-day basis the new students, and that is something I think is very valuable, which also encourages us to entrust and more to work with these people. Let's say our graduates, so those who we have trained, we have invested, and now let them come in to help the others. And that's and I do believe surely a lot of that kind of emotional part and is also being done. I can only confirm a good coordinator with a learning group, no matter the need in the same space all the time or several times, makes a big difference in the retention rate, also in the academic success of a learning side or the students. Thank you. Armando, you have anything? I don't know if you're on.
Well, maybe, Armando, before you speak, I just want to pick up a couple other questions before our time ends. So thank you for that, Peter. I think that was some good reflections and goes towards why blended approaches and having strong people on the ground is so important. But we do have another question from Leslie here about how your organizations went about creating the partnerships with other organizations, so be that UNHCR or other universities. So perhaps Armando or Peter, do you want to pick that up first?
So perhaps I can take this question. So for us, JWL, we do content delivery, but we also do content design. So the first partnerships that we have forged with a number of universities that actually go beyond the Jesuit network has been around the development of curriculum. So we have forged very exciting partnerships with the University of Utah around the development of psychosocial support and casework courses, curriculum, and as well as with a handful of Jesuit universities as well, Georgetown University, Boston College, Regis, Creighton University. So that has been one of the impetus of selecting partners. Most recently, we are forging other partnerships that include a recent partnership that we're setting up with Southern New Hampshire University, where we see complementarities in terms of a continuation of a learning pathway, where we provide certain training, and then we partner with universities being Southern New Hampshire or Creighton University, so that the students can continue beyond the diploma program into a bachelor's degree and further. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And Ashley, anything to add in terms of how you were able to build out your partnerships?
So in terms of our partnership with Southern New Hampshire University, we actually, Kepler launched at the same time as their College for America competency-based degree. So that really just worked out well that we were both piloting. So it made a lot of sense for us to work together. And I think since then, we've had opportunities to work with Arizona State University. Princeton has reached out to us. I think, you know, the consortium for Connected Learning in Crisis has really helped in bringing people together. And I think we've seen, at least in the past 2 years, I think a large interest from universities, especially in the United States and Europe, are interested in getting involved in humanitarian education. And so I think they've reached out to us most often asking about how we might collaborate. So I think that there's a lot of space for collaboration and a lot of really strong institutions who are interested in getting involved.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ashley. And just to say, in regards to partnering with UNHCR, we are also always on standby to meet. We've had great partnerships with all of the presenters and programs you've heard about today, and those have emerged from the work on the ground in the field, but also by getting in touch with the consortium or with us directly. So I'm adding to the information that Peter just provided on where you can go to get more information on the INEE website. I'll also add to that chat my email, and do feel free to reach out if you've got any further questions or feedback. So we'll take a moment to end there and just really thank all of the presenters for their time today, and to Jigsaw Consult and David for the very comprehensive research that I think has given us a lot of food for thought, looking at the landscape of this work and what the learnings across the programs have been. As noted at the beginning, this is the start of the year, and there are many very exciting technology and education webinars to come from INEE and the Tech Task Team. So please stay tuned for others, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thank you. Good.